Hey dreamers. I don't know why I didn't move my tea before I started. So welcome to my live this week. I should put my light on too. That's better. This week's theme is transformation, and the card that it comes from in the tarot deck is number 13 of the Major Arcana, Death. And it symbolizes metaphorical death, the ending of one thing and the beginning of another. What's up, Toffee? Every time I talk to the camera, she's on my lap. You gonna lie down? Make your own decisions. Come on. I don't know what it is about the death card. I think it's because it's one that comes up most often in media to make jokes about. But I've spent a lot of my early days with the tarot deck trying to understand the card and what it represents. Because I wanted to try and really get into what it means to find closure on something, and then for that to create space for other things to show up. And last November I did a card a day ritual, I guess, where I drew a card, shuffled the deck, drew a card, and interpreted it. But then I didn't put that card back in the deck. I kept it separate so that I would eventually get through all of the cards in the tarot. Because I wanted to use that as my way of getting familiar with what the cards actually meant and if any of them stood out. And so, the very last card that I drew for that was Death, which was a great place for the card to show up because I had, finished going through all 78 cards and then having to figure out, what did I want to do next with the tarot deck? And so what I did do was I gave it a few days, and then I went back to drawing cards. But this time I didn't replace. This time I did replace the card and put them back into the deck. But it would be another 5 months before I started doing it every day with a purpose to create an affirmation of some kind. The worst thing about having a cat on your lap is getting hair everywhere, and it's tickling my nose. And so I've been tracking all of my tarot cards since May. I haven't gone back to look at what cards have shown up the most or the fewest amount of times. But I don't recall the death card showing up off the top of my memory. That's not to say it hasn't. But it's one of those that I pay particular attention to, so I guess I would remember if it had shown up. But I have it this week for Kiki's Big Dream Experiment, week 10. And it comes just after last week's theme of completion, which is a nice place for it to come because, the idea of completing something and finding closure with that and then moving on to something new. And I found last week amongst the theme of completion, I have been looking at, how much time I've got left in Kiki's Big Dream Experiment, which is about 3 weeks, this week and two more. And then what I want to do after that. And I have been planning to run a new 90-day experiment. But I've been trying to figure out, did I want like a week between them or something like that? And in the end, I decided that I'm going to give myself about 4 weeks in between a month. Because when I actually laid it out on a calendar to see and, trying to fit 4 90-day experiments into a year, it's a lot, especially given the time that I spent last week, like trying to plan the next one. It was taking me away from actually finishing the current one, and I didn't want that to be an ongoing thing. I want to give all my time to the current experiment I'm in and finish that. So that's why I want to take some time in between. And I put up a calendar of sticky notes on my wall so that I could visualize it really and see. So having 3 experiments in a year with a month gap in between means that I can focus on the experiment while it's running. Then when it finishes, spend a little time sort of reflecting on it and closing off anything that might not be done in a way, and then planning for the next one. And so I'm not sure quite what it's going to mean for my social media presence. I imagine I'll still do daily TikToks. But I'll see. And what I found useful about that exercise was that it comes down to this theme of transformation. I was taking the 12 months of the year and, 365 days, 52 weeks, whatever measures there are that go into a year, and seeing, how do I want to actually operate? Because I realized the one thing that I was missing was that yearly structure, I suppose. And it's not something I wanted to start and figure out when I began Kiki Dreams Big in June. I wanted to take 6 months, which I've been calling arcs, 26 weeks, because I had kind of naturally been looking at my years in 6-month increments. I have a summer birthday, so 6 months to Christmas, 6 months to my birthday, that kind of thing. But also in school, you start in September, you get halfway through the year and you're like in January or so, and then the next 6 months you get to the end of the year. So everything is like kind of broken up like that. Same in work as well, with financial year end and making sure that things are on target. So that's why I came up with the idea of doing arcs that are 6 months long. And I finished my first one at the end of November. Because I finished that and was looking at the theme of completion, I naturally started moving into the theme of transformation even before it became my theme of the week. And what I found really useful was like exploring those different options. What's the difference it would make doing 4 experiments in a year versus 3 experiments in a year? 3 experiments would give me 3 extra months to have breaks or some downtime, or just, a break in the rhythm, I suppose. And I was also trying to overlay the arc on top of that as well, because I started my arc in June, which would run to November. And I was looking at, like, is that something I would want to change? And at the moment, I don't think so. Because there's a lot of reasons that like when I was moving things around, I'm looking at my calendar at the moment, which is why I'm like looking over there. But having the arcs the way they are, like being slightly shifted off by a month of the regular calendar, gives its own benefit because I'm not trying to kind of do everything at once. When I finish an arc in November and I've got December to like begin the new one, I've got time in December to like focus on that start of that new arc. And then when January comes, I've got that month break in between experiments to like help plan my year just after the new year. And it gives a slight variation to how things show up. And even within that, the arcs are going to be a little different too. So one of them is going to have, that's the way I did it. Yeah, so the arc 2 starts in December and runs until May, is going to have this month of an experiment, a break, 3 months of an experiment, and then a break. So there's 2 months in there for a break and 4 experiment months. And then for June to November, it's going to be 3 experiment months, a break month, and then 2 months. And I've been thinking about this just to kind of get an idea of what my year looks like or would look like if I continue this pattern, because having a pattern to follow makes it a bit easier to plan things because it's one pattern for everything. I've got my calendar for day-to-day stuff, and on top of that, I'm going to have my work. So trying to see, if I'm taking a holiday, is it going to be within an experiment or outside of an experiment? If it's within one, what does that mean for like moving tasks around if I need to? Uh, so that's what I was doing a bit of last week, looking at basically how I'm transforming my time and how I want to show up the best way I can. Because I realized that if I was jumping in from one experiment to the next, I'm not going to have much time to actually plan out things to the degree that I would like to. It at least relieves some of that pressure. I wrote my LinkedIn article yesterday and I had a lot of thoughts about what transformation means. And at the core, I really broke it down to everything is changing every single second. And if we don't realize that, then we kind of get left behind. Like today, I'm showing up as a slightly different person to who I was yesterday. And tomorrow I'll be slightly different again. And we're all like that. Eventually, those days compound on one another, and you see, year on year, how much you're changing. And when we're not aware of it in the day to day, then when it gets to looking back on the year, it can feel like we haven't been intentional with what we've been doing because we get stuck in habits, and those habits take up our time, and we spend so little time actually doing new things and using our time effectively. And I was looking back at, how I've transformed over the last 6 months. Hi, Monica. How are you? I looked at when I set up my website for Kiki Dreams Big. I put a little introductory note on it about what my dream for Kiki Dreams Big is. Good to hear, Monica. Hey, Toffee. And I was looking at that, and I realized that that little note about wanting to live a life of intention and joy and happiness has essentially already come true. But it doesn't feel like I've necessarily been doing anything to work towards that. It was just it was, I guess, the vibe or the energy I was putting into Kiki Dreams Big. And I guess that's where the transformation comes in, because it's that little mindset change that has an effect on what you do. That's what I was spending so much time doing in Arc 1 of Kiki Dreams Big, following that intuition that tells me to create something or try something, or go over here and give that a go. And it takes you to amazing places. What is my biggest dream? My biggest dream is the one that I feel is furthest away, and that is to go to space. It's something I've always wanted as a kid. And when I was a kid, I thought like anyone could just do it if they wanted to, but I realized that it doesn't really work like that. um, but I got a renewed vigor for that this year when Katy Perry went to space. I was like, oh, celebrity can do it? Okay, the rules are getting a bit lax now, so maybe sometime in the future I'll have a chance to do it. So that's my biggest one. Because I've always like I love science, and I love like space things, In a way it shows us how big we are, but also how small we are. Because like nothing we actually do really makes a difference in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the universe. The universe being 14 billion years old, we can barely get through a year, you know? How could we get through 14 billion of them? It's just it's so vast, like it's impossible to really grasp. And what I found was with my interest in space and like massive things like that, it changes your perspective on the way that you view things. You have to like scale your imagination in different ways. But what I found fascinating is that there's patterns that repeat. Hi, Toffee. Come up here. Come up. I don't know if you can hear her purring. Meow. Come on. Stop talking to me. Come up here. Talk to me up here on camera. What is it? Toffee. Come on. She always comes over to me when I do videos, whether I'm just talking to myself or on lives. There you are. Say hello. There's something out the window that's catching your eye. But yeah, the thing I found with science and studying it is that the patterns repeat whether it is on the macro scale or the micro scale. You know, we have the solar system and the planets, and we know how they move, and we can see them in the sky at certain times of the year, I suppose. I don't know the full patterns, I just follow an app and it tells me, oh, Jupiter is visible tonight. But for years, you know, I had this image that the sun is in one place and the planets move around it. But in reality, the collective solar system is moving as a unit as well. So it's more like a corkscrew because we're traveling through another orbit at that scale. And that's really wild to try and grasp, I suppose, because Earth isn't just spinning around the sun, it's spinning around the sun and it's also moving, so it's spiraling. But then the moon is traveling around the Earth, which is traveling around the sun, which is spiraling as well. So the path is insane. And then when you take into account that the Earth is spinning as well, like how do you make sense of, you know, our orientation with respect to things? We don't pay attention to it because on the scale where we are on Earth, where it doesn't feel like anything is moving, it's crazy to actually realize that we're hurtling through the universe at whatever speeds. I don't even know what speeds they are, but you know, we're moving at a fixed velocity because if we were experiencing acceleration, we would notice that. But at a fixed speed, you don't notice it at all. So that's why going to space is one of my biggest dreams, because I would like to experience the world in a different way. And on one hand, I feel like it wouldn't change me and the way that I see things because I've been thinking about it so much and I watch, you know, so many movies about it. But there is another part of me that feels like it would change something. And I don't know what that would be. I just feel like it's there. And that's where that's how transformation shows up everywhere. You know, even with Toffee here, it would make a difference to her if I didn't let her up in my lap versus if I told her to leave the room while I'm doing my video. But of course, I'm going to choose the one that I like and the one that she likes, which is to let her up in my lap. And the thing about transformation is we can choose things that we want to do. We also experience things that happen in the world that we are not in control of. And both of those kind of things will transform us in some way. And it can be tough to deal with the ones that are external, that we have no control over. You know, when you think of massive tragedies, very traumatic things, it feels violating for that to happen because, you know, you don't expect it to happen, and you don't agree to it happening. Thanks for joining, Monica. Thanks for the follow. But when you look at what you can control, you know, when you're intentional about what you do, you can kind of train yourself to be mindful of how you make meaning of things. I need to look up the dates for these, but over the course of Arc 1 of Kiki Dreams Big, I created mantras, I guess, which embody the values, I suppose, that I live by. And one of the first ones, what are you up to? One of the first ones was simply just choose happiness. And that could be happiness in the present, it could be happiness in the future, potentially happiness in the past. I haven't really thought that far about it, but I'm sure when I've done reflective work on the past and I've, you know, evolved from moments that weren't happy, maybe there's an element of choosing happiness that way, retrospectively. But it came down to this moment where I was in my kitchen, and I don't know what was on my mind, but I went over to the freezer and I was deciding, do I want to have this pizza now or do I want to have it tomorrow? And it just made me think that, well, if I have it now, then obviously I'll enjoy the pizza. But if I have it tomorrow, then, or rather, not if I have it tomorrow, but if I don't have it tonight, then it will sit in the freezer, and tomorrow, if I don't feel like cooking, then I'll have a pizza I can fall back on. So there's that sense of safety, I suppose. So I don't remember what I actually chose, but it's the moment I came up with choosing happiness, because what it really told me was, in the moment, I can choose what makes me happiest now or what will make me happiest in future, and try to balance those together. So if in the moment I really wanted pizza, but I was capable enough to like cook a dish from scratch that would take longer and require more effort, if I was in a space where I could do that, then why not leave the pizza for another day and put my energy and effort into cooking a meal? Because that act itself is choosing happiness, because I've got the energy to do it, right? But the other part of it is that I have that backup of the pizza. So if another day something comes up and I like don't have time to cook or I don't have the energy to cook, then I know I have that backup plan sitting there. And that's why I will often like buy multiples of things or make sure to have like backup pizza or frozen dish that I can cook really easily if I need it. And it was really important to recognize in that moment. That's why it became my first mantra, is because it's important to live in the moment, but it's also important to be intentional about what your future is going to look like as well. And I had always been living so much in the future I suppose, financially, with respect to like buying a house, getting a mortgage, those kind of things. And I had always been a bit frugal, I suppose, with living in the present. But I'm far better at that now because of this mantra, the other work I've done to like look at the value of money and the impact it would have presently versus in the future. Because I suppose the difficulty is with the future, I have no idea how much money I might need for something. And that was kind of debilitating in a way because it kind of made me err on the side of caution to like put as much away for the future as possible. And it's not that I was taking away from the present. At least not intentionally. But that little shift in mindset that all came from Choose Happiness was a big transformation. And it's like if you think of this idea of scale, I'll go back to the universe. You've got the planets are operating on a scale we can't even think of. If we really think of it, we have to put in a lot of effort into like visualizing how it all works. And then we bring it down to our scale and we know how the world works. But then we go microscopic and we look at, the germs that are on everything around here that we can't see or interact with. Going down even further to atoms and subatomic particles. When you realize that the big things and the small things are all connected in that way, it really makes you wonder how much of an effect your individual actions on a day actually affect your life. How much would having a coffee in the morning affect your life in the long term? In the short term, it might mean that, you're a bit more productive in the morning, but then you'll hit a crash later on. What's the impact that has? What work or what things are you doing in the afternoon that will suffer because of that crash? And what things are you doing in the morning will benefit from that extra energy? There's an ebb and a flow to everything. And this is what I've been not just realizing, because I knew that anyway, but working with, I suppose. It's like that Choose Happiness story of the pizza. I could have pizza now and enjoy it, and that would mean that the next time I want to make dinner on another day, I have to cook. So, do I want to take the chance that nothing's going to come up on a day and I'll have plenty of time to cook? Or do I want to like not worry about that possibility and just use the energy I have in the day to cook a meal while I have it? And it comes down to this balancing act. You can worry a lot about the future, but bring it back to the present. What's the best thing for your present self? It might take time and energy to cook a meal from scratch, but in the moment, it doesn't feel like a huge obstacle to overcome. But if a day did come about where I just got home and said, I just need to have this pizza and marinate on a couch for 4 hours, then what I'm getting from that as well is a kindness from myself that I, had that willpower to leave the pizza alone until a day where I absolutely couldn't leave it alone. And it's this ebb and flow thing of I'll use the energy on the earlier day to cook, knowing that when I do have that pizza, it's going to feel far more rewarding. There's oh, that caught me off guard. Sorry, that was the doorbell. This awful doorbell we have that is way too loud and just a terrible sound. Um, I think I was talking about my other mantras. They came up in other moments where I realized, oh, this is a moment where something important is happening, and they all came from such small moments. Like that first one for the mantra choose happiness came from deciding whether or not I wanted a frozen pizza. My second mantra, I don't even remember where it came from, but it's simply just be intentional. And it relates back to choose happiness in terms of that planning of time and energy in the present. If I have a lot of energy to go and do something, use that energy now because I might not have it in 2 or 3 hours. And also, being intentional is about following through on ideas that you've got. When I set up Kiki Dreams Big and created this 6 month arc 1, my intention with it was to use those 6 months to just explore creativity and see where it would lead me, so that by the time I got to November, I would have an idea of what I want to do next. And I found certain things in that time that I knew I wanted to continue with. And so I already had pieces for what I wanted to do next. And it all came from that purpose of being intentional with my time. Going with the intuition, going with the interest and the creativity for something. Like in the early days when I talked about what I was doing, I felt like people looked at me like I was crazy. Sitting down, learning a word a day and writing poetry. Hey, Monica. Or like going through old school copybooks that I had because I never threw them out. And all these little things, but I held on to these. I had ideas for doing them. And until I acted on them, they were sitting there as like, oh, you should do this. And so when I finally followed those through, I found other things. So, like with the poetry word a day, uh, I told myself I would do it for a week, maybe. Well, actually, what happened was I said I wanted to learn a word a day. And along with that, oh my God, Toffee, can you choose what you're doing? You keep hitting me with your tail. I wanted to learn a word a day, but I wanted to like give an exercise to it so that I could like connect that word to something practical. So my first exercise was to write a poem with it, like a short thing, 3 or 4 sentences maybe. Hello, you gonna lie down? And on day 2, then I did something different, and on day 3, I did something else different. But for days 2 and 3, I also enjoyed the poem so much from day 1 that I wanted to do that as well. And then when it came to day 4, I said, you know what, I'm just going to do a poem every day because this is the exercise that I enjoy the most, and it helped me to connect the word or to give it a definition that would stick with me. And so that evolved into doing the word a day for 10 weeks. And so I got 70 poems out of that. Thanks, Marcus. Toffee says thank you as well. Did you hear that, Toffee? You're a super cute cat. So I got 70 poems out of that word a day. And I also, went a bit further and I did a poem for my birthday. I've been doing one each week now for Kiki's Big Dream Experiment. So that's another 9 so far in Kiki's Big Dream Experiment and one extra for my birthday. And I realized, oh, I like writing poetry. So there's a reason that idea and that creative spark was in there. There's a reason I enjoyed it when I was faced with the prospect of doing a poem just for the sake of writing a poem. When it comes down to doing it because you have schoolwork or someone else tells you you have to do it, we can be resentful over being told what to do when we don't understand it or want to do it. And that can make us, dislike the activity. But when you're doing it of your own volition, it makes such a difference. And really, it does transform you when you spot that, when you see that, doing something out of interest and creativity and love for doing the thing has a much bigger impact than doing it because someone tells you to do it. Hey, Marcus. So, I'm Kiki. Kiki was when I created Kiki Dreams Big, I created Kiki as a future version of myself that I wanted to grow into. The version of me that's confident on camera, that knows what he wants, that gets what he wants, that does only things that he loves. And the purpose behind that really was to sort of imagine a future that I could work towards so that in my everyday I can do like little things to get there. For example, I started doing TikTok videos every day starting in June. And I started with a 30-day challenge where every day I would do a 1 minute long video just talking about something from the day. And I remember that very first video, it took me like half an hour or 40 minutes to like decide what I wanted to say, to actually say it, to not mumble about it, to like make a point, and to edit it as well. And that got easier over time. And eventually, over the last number of months, I've got to the point where I can now sit in front of a camera for an hour and just talk about stuff. So that's one example of, doing a small thing every day and building it up to a version of me that I want it to be. And I suppose it's the same as like setting a goal, but it's a little bit, it feels a little bit more personal. Because I don't need to follow a plan exactly. I kind of take things as they come, and I can follow a plan in terms of like doing the 30-day challenge. But over the time, I get to see the evolution from where I started to where I ended, and like how much closer am I getting to that version that's more confident. So that's who Kiki is, really. There's a lot of ways of describing him. In one way, you could say it's like an imaginary friend. In another way, it's just me. But the purpose of him really is it feels easier to externalize something. For me, anyway, it feels easier to externalize something and to like understand it and then be able to like identify what are the steps to get from here to there and then follow those steps. Because what I found is if I just write stuff down on paper, I'm not necessarily following something I want to do. I could be writing it down because that's what I should feel I want. Like I was looking at, I was applying to different jobs last year, and once I submitted my CV and then they came back and said, oh, you want to go to the next stage, I was feeling, actually, I don't want to do that. So then I was questioning, like, why was I applying to these things if I didn't want to go to the next step? It's because I was applying just because, my CV would fit the requirements. But if I wanted to do exactly the same thing as I was doing, I wouldn't have left my job in the first place. So I had to come up with a new plan to figure out what I wanted to do, really. Try and break it down to the things I know I like. I like problem solving. I like building systems. I like coding then because coding helps with both of those things. I like creating stories from data, or rather, see what stories the data is telling you. I like creating poetry and other things as well. And so by finding out all of those little things that I enjoyed, I could build them up to a slightly different story of myself based on the same experience. And that new story is something that I knew I could follow instead. And all of that is a transformation. I'm still the same person with the same skills, but what I'm transforming there is one, my understanding of what I want, and two, the story that I have wrapped around it. because so much of the story I had before was the story that others were putting on me. I was still choosing to do X kind of job and work there for so many years. And I suppose my reasons for doing so. Thanks, Marcus. Thanks for joining. My reasons for doing so, they were my own reasons and they made sense and everything, but I wasn't paying too much attention to the story that came with those reasons. Hmm. So, hmm. Each week in Kiki's Big Dream Experiment, I have a theme for the week. I wanted the theme to be random, so I only find out what it is on the Sunday before Monday begins. And I set that up intentionally because I like having some kind of surprise to look forward to. I really didn't want to set out 12 weeks of themed content, partly because I knew it would distract me from individual weeks and I would potentially get bored. If I saw a theme coming along that I didn't really want to engage with, it would it would throw me off. I know it would throw me off. So I kept them random so that by the time I needed to engage with a theme, I was like right there with it. And, I just had to get through one day at a time. Some of them have been quite difficult to go through, and others have been really easy. I feel like this one with transformation feels very easy because I've been so close to that idea for a long time. And that's probably because, the kind of media that I like superhero stories, fairy tales, magic, and like coming into power, that kind of thing. Not like coming into power as like ruling people and stuff, but coming into your own power and understanding your gifts. And I always loved those kind of stories, and that's basically what I crafted for myself with Kiki Dreams Big was how do I do that for myself? How do I find out what my gifts are and how I can use them very intentionally? So by doing small things every day, I was building up a I suppose I was building up a story of what was happening because I was just writing down what was going on. So I can go back and look at a particular day and see what came up then. And by doing that, I can see the evolution that's happened since I wrote down that idea, or I wrote that article, or I did that video. And it's great to see, the ideas and dreams I once had and where they've got to now. Because I know just how lost and anxious I was in the early days of this, feeling like I didn't know what I was doing because I wasn't able to articulate it to other people. When I told people like, "Oh, I'm taking 6 months off to like just do whatever I want, I got a lot of funny looks. It's like, okay, but what kind of things are you doing? Oh, I'm doing tarot cards every day. I'm writing poetry, journaling a lot. They're like, okay, where is this going? Um, I'll find out, I suppose. I like the surprise of the journey. You know, when I'm working towards a destination, when it's of my own creation, I can just follow my feelings and intuition, and I know it will be useful one way or another. When I'm doing things for other people, say in work, um, it's a bit different because the vision that one person has is not necessarily the story they're telling. And that's been tough over the years to try and like figure out what is the story that you want to tell about this problem or project so that I can understand it from your perspective and then be able to help you get there. And that skill I've been using on myself as well. Like really trying to break down what is it that I do want? What are the end goals that I want? And then taking them small pieces at a time. That's the really difficult part when you're stuck in so many habits and you understand the world in a particular way. It can be really hard to break those beliefs down and build up new ones. And that's why it felt difficult in the early days to talk about what I was doing because I didn't really have the words for it yet. But looking back on it now, I do have the words. I was breaking down my old belief system basically and building up a new one that was more solid, more sustainable. Because when I left my job, I spent so much time thinking like I can't go back into an office again. I just I don't see that being possible for me anymore. But where I am now, I can see, well, yeah, actually I could go back into an office because I've got a stronger foundation to work from. And that's been a big transformation in me that I wasn't really expecting. And I think that's, you know, it's the good and the bad. There's always going to be some transformation you're not aware of, and some of it is going to be good, some of it is going to be bad. I think when it comes to the bad, usually it's that you're gaining awareness of yourself in new ways. You know, seeing how the past has affected you through, I'll say, trauma, because so much trauma is inflicted upon ourselves by the way that we think about things, the way that we make meaning of things. You know, the smallest thing that that another person says can really stick with you if it like hits the wrong nerve. And so you build an entire picture of this person being awful to you because of that. That's just an example. And we do it to ourselves every single day. You know, I've noticed it on my lives when people ask a question a particular way. Um, I don't know, is it because they're genuinely curious or if they're goading me in some way. And I've had to like check that initial reaction and try to put a pause on that and see it as coming from a place of good intentions. Because if I see it from a place of good intention, then I will be able to respond with kindness and honesty and all of the other values that I hold. But if I feel like it's an attack, then I'll get defensive. And if it is coming from a place of good intentions, then, there's this disconnect that's come up because of my perception. Hmm. So, this theme of transformation, there's a lot to go with it. I think one thing that I haven't really spoken about, I talked a little bit about it at the beginning of the video with my calendar. Transformation in terms of taking a problem or a situation and like moving it around so that you can see it in a different way. That's a really powerful thing as well. It's really powerful when you share that with somebody else and they give you feedback or information or some kind of response that helps you to visualize it in a different way. This is why, like, that is the point of therapy, is to change your perspective on things so that you can, like, reconfigure your thoughts and therefore your behaviors. But even in the working world, when I am given a data set with questions that I have and I'm trying to put those together, going to someone and saying, look, this is what my plan is, this is what I want to do. How's that sound? And then, they can say, yeah, sounds great. Or they might say, oh, you said you wanted to do this, but actually you don't have the data for that, so you'll have to think about it differently. There's little pieces of feedback that can be really important. And sometimes they're the really obvious ones. And missing those really obvious ones it can feel pretty bad because, missing them feels like a simple mistake. But you've gone down a road where you've looked at more complex things and you've solved more complex problems and you've brought extra value that way. And unless you can see that for yourself, getting stuck on those little mistakes that you make can be quite tough. So everything is constantly changing. We're constantly changing. And if you give in to that and go with it and like direct your change, it makes a big difference. There's a lot of talk about jumping timelines and quantum leaping, and all these terms are great, but they can also sound very wishy-washy. It really comes down to changing your perspective and doing something you wouldn't normally do. Not sure what you mean, Johnny. And that's what those terms mean, like doing something different to what you normally do. Because if you stay doing the same things you always do, you'll never change or grow. When you start doing new things, you realize that there's new skills you can learn, there's new ways of applying your skills, and that's when you start to notice a transformation. But some of those terms, like quantum leaping, can feel so out there that they don't really explain how can you bring it back to the everyday. And I think that's where the difficulty is. Translating all of these concepts to your everyday. I found it in school with mathematics. I really liked mathematics and problem solving. And I found that so many other people struggled with it, but it always came back to, like, why do I need this in my day to day? And that can be a barrier for a lot of people. It's why certain people will enjoy certain subjects because they realize they just love it. And because they love it, they'll use it every day in some way. But for the subjects they don't like, they don't see why it would make a difference. Like, I didn't like history when I was studying it in school because, the purpose of learning history wasn't really made clear. And I had to choose between doing history or doing metalwork. And so I went for metalwork because metalwork was far more interesting. I got to build stuff, I got to learn new information. If I wanted to learn anything from history, I have the internet. I have history books that I can look up instead. I have the internet as well if I want to look up how an engine works, but it's different in that an engine is like a 3D physical contraption that has mechanics and science and everything connected to it. Whereas history is quite different. There's a lot of nuance to it that wasn't made clear to us as 12-year-olds. And the same can go for every subject. I noticed it in mathematics, I noticed it in science, not so much, because people kind of knew, okay, this is going to be applicable to life. It's just not going to be applicable to my life, usually. If you're looking at biology or chemistry, I suppose is the big one. Like, people are saying, why do I need to worry about these chemical reactions? And that's a form of transformation that I like to get into, is taking complex ideas and breaking them down to something you can apply every day. Something that everyone can understand. Because I have to break it down for myself to really get an understanding of it. And to see where it fits into the world. And to see where it fits into my world. And there's a skill that comes with it, and it's that skill that when I was tutoring students, it's that skill that I tried to impart. Because once you understand that skill, then you can apply it in lots of different places. And the more you practice it, the more you get better at it. Like anything. So I'm going to wrap up my live now. Thanks for joining me this week on the theme of transformation. Next week will be week 11, and then the week after that is 12. And that'll be the end of Kiki's big dream experiment. I don't know what will come next, so enjoy these lives while you can. Thanks for watching and keep dreaming.